And then the third excuse, I think there were three big excuses in that video. One was, I'm just a kid. One was, my parents should have done something about it. And the third one, I think, was, isn't that God's job? What do you think about that?
That's a question that's always kind of been with me, I guess, because one of my first breakthroughs, I can't remember, it was when Invisible Children came, and they were having a Q&A session after, and we were just talking to them, and one of the guys was telling a story about how he was at a conference with a bunch of people, and he met a man somewhere who was an atheist and was asking him, why hasn't God done anything? He supposedly, loves you all, so much, but there's so much awfulness in the world. Why hasn't he fixed it? Why hasn't he done anything? And the man said that he didn't know what to say, and it was one of those things where you just don't really know what to do, and you try to explain, but you can't really get it. And he said a couple days later, it just hit him, and he wanted to call the man who had asked him that up and tell him, and because he realized that God had done something, he put us here to do it. It wasn't God isn't doing anything. We're here. We're his children. We're his followers. We're his servants. This is what we're supposed to do, and so we're the solution.
Awesome. Anything else?
I don't know. Whenever I get this question, I've discussed it in so many different classes, but for some reason, the thing that always comes to mind is the Casting Crown song. I don't know if it's called "If We Are the Body." I don't know.
If we are the body.
Yeah.
What is everybody clap? Da, da, da. That one.
Yeah, but you didn't get the important part.
I don't know
it
that
says, "If we are the body, why aren't his hands moving? Why aren't his feet going?" Just I don't think we realize that we are his change agents here. We are the people that are called to make a difference. And I just remember we watched a video on the Chicago mission trip this summer. I don't really remember it that well, but I just remember being overcome by that thought. When she was it was some computer thing, and then she was on the top of a building. She was yelling at God throughout the whole video, and then she was yeah, I'll go, I'll do this. I know that I'm supposed to do this for you and through you. So.
Cool. Thank you, guys. Are you done? Anybody else? You good? You're good. Chris and Chris? You guys are good? Okay. Cool. You can grab it. You can leave it. Whatever. We're going to look at, just for a minute, we're going to look at Job chapter 24. Because Job is one of those books that talks a lot about oppression. And actually, at this point in Job, how many of you are familiar with the story of Job? Job's the guy who, it's actually an easy book to find because it's the middle of the book is Psalms, middle of the Bible is Psalms, and then Job is right to well, okay. It's to this side. Anyway, you can open, it's easy to find, whatever. So in Job chapter 24, by this point, Job has lost his house, he's lost his family, he's lost all his possessions, and his friends showed up. There are three of them, and all they've done the whole book up to this point is talk about to Job, well, these are the things you must have done wrong in order for these things to happen. It was kind of like what Emily was talking about with that cycle of how people are ostracized. Obviously you did something wrong or your family did something wrong, and that's how you got into this situation. And so that's the kind of support that Job has gotten from his friends up to this point, and he's just listened. And it gets to this point where Job is ready to talk. And so what we're going to do, Job is just making some observations about the world. And so what I want you to do, every time you hear some form of oppression, something that sounds like some form of oppression, just raise your hand. And we'll see how many things we notice. Here we go. Verse 1, Job 24. Why does the Almighty not set times for judgment? Why must those who know him look in vain for such days? Have you ever heard, have you ever questioned God like this? Why are these things happening, basically? Who's ever just thought that? Why is all of this happening? Yeah. So Job's asking that same question. So, as you hear some form of oppression, raise your hand. Here we go, verse 2. Men move boundary stones. Who knows what that even means? Yeah, okay, you got your hand raised up. What they did back in the day to mark their property is they had these boundary stones. And so people would just come out in the middle of the night and they would move them over so that their land would be bigger. And then when somebody would come out and say, oh, you moved my stone, they'd be like, no, I didn't. I didn't do that. So that's just like one form. Still in verse 2, they pasture flocks they have stolen. They drive away the orphan's donkey and take the widow's ox in pledge. They thrust the needy from the path and force all the poor of the land into hiding. Like wild donkeys in the desert, the poor go about their labor of foraging food. The wasteland provides food for their children. They gather fodder in the fields and glean in the vineyards of the wicked. Lacking clothes, they spend the night naked. They have nothing to cover themselves in the cold. They are drenched by mountain rains and hug the rocks for lack of shelter. The fatherless child is snatched from the breast. The infant of the poor is seized for a debt. Lacking clothes, they go about naked. They carry the sheaves, but still go hungry. They crush olives among the terraces. They tread the winepresses, yet suffer thirst. The groans of the dying rise from the city, and the souls of the wounded cry out for help. But God charges no one with wrongdoing. There are those who rebel against the light, who do not know its ways or stay in its paths. When daylight is gone, the murderer rises up and kills the poor and needy. In the night he steals forth like a thief. The eye of the adulterer watches for dusk. He thinks, no eye will see me, and he keeps his face concealed. In the dark, men break into houses, but by day they shut themselves in. They want nothing to do with the light. For all of them, deep darkness is their mourning. They make friends with the terrors of darkness. So, right here in Scripture, just in these first 17 verses of chapter 24, there's almost an endless list of all these forms of oppression that people are facing. We'll come back to these last few verses in a minute, but I want to look at a couple different things that oppressors use to attack their victims. Because I think we have a tendency as people who, honestly, we've got it pretty easy for the most part. So we have a tendency to just oversimplify the problems of the world. That's just kind of what we do, and we're really good at it. And so a lot of times we lack a deeper understanding of what's really going on. But here's a couple things. Oppressors attack their victims with two weapons. One is coercion, and one is deception. And here are the definitions of those. Coercion is force. Coercion is compelling people by force to do what they otherwise wouldn't do. Who can think of an example of this in our world? Blackmail? Yeah. What's that? Extortion. Going to school. Could be. It could be. Slavery. Yeah, modern day slavery. Okay, and then deception. Deception is lying in all its forms. So it's a couple things. It's withholding information. It's suppressing information by like keeping the press from really putting out honest reports. It's misinformation, which is just misleading people. It's disinformation, which is just lying. And it's propaganda, which is making one side of the story look better than it is and the other side look worse. Any examples of this that you see in our world? The Holocaust. What about going on right now? It's been in the news the last couple of weeks, big time. Libya. Yeah, there's a lot of this going on right now in Libya. I was just reading a report yesterday about a group of people that they were news reporters. They'd been held by force, and Libya is saying to the national press, "Oh no, the press is free to be here." But there was a CNN crew that was like taken by force, tied up, put in jail, and really threatened about spreading the news that they were trying to spread. So, anybody feel just completely helpless by this kind of stuff, or completely overwhelmed? Have you ever felt like, do you feel, thinking about all this stuff, all the oppression, all of these things, completely overwhelmed, like maybe there's not much that we can do about it? Honestly, like, does anybody feel like you can really take this on and win by yourself? So I think the question is, for us, is what does God think about this? And I'm going to go back. We're going to look at this scripture one more time. This is what Job is saying God thinks about oppressors. Yet they are foam on the surface of the water. Their portion of the land is cursed, so that no one goes to the vineyards. As heat and drought snatch away the melted snow, so the grave snatches away those who have sinned. The womb forgets them. The worm feasts on them. The wicked are no longer remembered, but are broken like a tree. They prey on the barren and childless woman, and to the widow show no kindness. But God drags away the mighty by his power. Though they become established, they have no assurance of life. He may let them rest in a feeling of security, but his eyes are on their ways. For a little while, they are exalted, and then they are gone. They are brought low and gathered up like all others. They are cut off like heads of grain. If this is not so, who can prove me false and reduce my words to nothing? He's basically asking, can you give an example? Is it possible to give an example of any major oppressor who in the end stayed in power, stayed exalted, was able to keep going with what they were doing? Because in the end, they all have the same types of things happen to them, and that's because God is totally on the side of the oppressed. We're going to watch a music video. This is actually a great illustration of the use of coercion and lies. What's the other word that I used? I can't even remember. Thank you. That one. Coercion and deception. Let's watch this music video.